Good evening, BookTube. Welcome to yet another video. I have decided to do a roundup of all the books that I have chosen to read over the course of this month. There are quite a few. I hope this video won't be too long, and let's see what we have here. I'm going to start with The Third Reich in Power by Richard Evans, the great historian of Nazi Germany. This is a great work of social history, first and foremost. It's an account of how the Nazis effectively subverted and destroyed, effectively, civil society in Germany as part of their totalitarian scheme. And it goes to show, it demonstrates all of the legislation that was put in place, all of the organizations that were set up for the specific purpose of suborning and mobilizing the German people behind Hitler's monstrous project. One thing that I took away from reading this book, which was quite inspiring, was that for all of their efforts, the Nazis did not fully succeed in implementing their totalitarian ideals. There was still a kernel of resistance somewhere within the souls of the German people. There was still an aspect of them which resisted the brainwashing and the ceaseless efforts at proselytization and brainwashing and indoctrination of the population that is frankly quite inspiring and confirms my own long-held thesis that the aims of totalitarian regimes are, quite frankly, impossible, because what a totalitarian regime seeks to do is to eliminate any heterogeneity within its polity. The idea is to destroy any sense of difference, any sense of individuality from the society in question, and to create a completely homogeneous society in which there are no real differences, political, religious, ethnic, or otherwise, and in which everyone is mindlessly loyal to the state. And what Richard Evans shows in his masterful social history is that, despite their best efforts, there were still ordinary Germans who insisted on resisting, even if they did so internally as opposed to openly. But it was an eye-opening read, a chilling read, an example of the dark path a nation can go down if it ends up under the stewardship of an organization as horrifying and as murderous as the Nazis. So that was Richard Evans' The Third Reich in Power. I have next two works by James Baldwin, No Name in the Street and The Fire Next Time. The Fire Next Time was published in 1963, before No Name in the Street, which was published in 1974, I believe it was. No, 1972. So these two collections of essays were published 9 years apart, and it's Baldwin at his best. The Fire Next Time is Baldwin excoriating, hectoring, denouncing, decrying the appalling racism that he and other blacks experienced in American society at that time. And the first section of the book takes the form of a long letter he's writing to his nephew, in which he is trying to reassure his nephew that despite the horrors of racism, despite the horrific persecution that the black community is enduring in American society, there is still some hope for positive social transformation in his lifetime, if not in the lifetime of his uncle. And what Baldwin is very clear about is that America either has to change or it will be destroyed on the rock of its own contradictions. The second section of this book deals more with Baldwin's own feelings with regards to his encounters with white racists, his encounters with fellow blacks, particularly with the Nation of Islam, his discomfort with the ideology of the Nation of Islam, tempered, of course, with some, what I believe is a sneaking sympathy for their ideals. And Baldwin is very much at a loss, it seems to me, as to how exactly to deal with this phenomenon, which he doesn't accept completely, but nevertheless understands as perhaps an inevitable byproduct of racist oppression. Now, Baldwin is a fantastic prose stylist. He is sulphurous, he is fulminating, his writing is like oratory, quite frankly. When I read it, I can imagine him proclaiming it. I can imagine him actually speaking this. And if you go on YouTube and you actually listen to him speaking, he was a very forceful and profound speaker. This is the same Baldwin who, after all, bested William Buckley, of all people, in that infamous debate that they had at, I believe it was Oxford University in 1965, I believe it was. So this is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. No Name in the Street is his much later essay collection that he wrote when he went off to France. This was his second time going to France after the collapse, effectively, of the civil rights movement, or as a result of the assassination of Martin Luther King and other prominent black civil rights leaders and activists, whose assassinations are chillingly recorded in this book, as well as Baldwin's own emotional reaction to what happened. It's a much darker book than The Fire Next Time. One gets the impression that Baldwin has become a lot more pessimistic by this time about the reality of black-white relations, and it leads him into some interesting and frankly disturbing directions. His effusive praise for the Black Panthers is not something I am entirely comfortable with, but it's understandable given what he experienced in his life, and I suppose it's understandable why so many black people, given the situation they faced, saw the Black Panthers as some sort of salvation. I'm not one of those people. I believe they were a very sinister, very loathsome group, and I'm glad that they were destroyed. But I absolutely empathize with Baldwin's reasons for defending them. Moving on from James Baldwin, we have Volker Ulrich's biography of Hitler, which is absolutely fantastic. I got this book many years ago and have only just gotten round to reading it. And I wish I'd read it sooner, but I'm glad that I got to it when I did. This was actually published back in 2013, but it was translated 3 years later. And what Ulrich does is he builds magnificently on the existing historiography about Hitler. There are so many preconceptions about this man who is rightly seen as the ultimate symbol of radical evil. One of the biggest myths that Ulrich does his very best to dismantle in this monumental work is this idea that Hitler was this rather abnormal man who didn't have a personal life. His life was totally subsumed in political activity, And what Ulrich does is he shows how this was very much part of Hitler's image. This was the myth that he wanted to project about himself, that this was a man of destiny who had given himself wholly over to the German people, who had no personal life, who had no romantic life, who was totally in the service of his country. And Ulrich does a magnificent job of showing how this was very much a self-serving illusion that he projected with great success for pretty much his entire career. What Ulrich does successfully is he reconstructs the reality using the available source material of Hitler's personal relationships, and he brings to the surface a much more human Hitler than perhaps some readers might be comfortable with. This is a Hitler who definitely was interested in women, despite the myth that he was asexual or even homosexual, despite the myth that he was somehow sexually abnormal or dysfunctional. All the evidence that we actually have suggests otherwise, suggests that he was a rather boring heterosexual male who did a very good job of hiding his interests, romantic, sexual, or otherwise, behind this facade of the man of destiny, totally absorbed in political activity. And this is actually the first volume of his biography of Hitler. This goes from his birth to his seizure of power. And what this does a great job of showing is that there was nothing inevitable about it. Hitler did not have to become Chancellor. Hindenburg did not have to appoint Hitler. He could have kept Brüning. He could have kept Papen. But what happened was very much a conspiracy among members of the elite to bring him to power, in the belief that they could control him. There was nothing inevitable about it. This was not a seizure of power. Hitler was appointed as a result of a very well-orchestrated conspiracy by German elites to put him in power. These conservative nationalists believed that they could control Hitler, and boy were they wrong. So that is Volker Ulrich's Hitler biography. Then there is Hardy Women by Paula Byrne. I actually did a review of this book for Open Letters Review, which I will link in the description. This is a very unconventional biography of Thomas Hardy. It's part biography, part literary study, and it's supposed to be a life of Hardy through the women who influenced him. So we have his mother, we have his two wives, Emma and Florence, we have the various women who he became infatuated with during his life, some of them plain country girls, others higher society women that he consorted with during the more successful period of his life, when he was feted in all of the literary salons of London as this great Victorian novelist and poet. And it is a very interesting, very original work of biography that I wouldn't recommend to someone who's never read Hardy, because it assumes that you've already read the works, that you already know who Hardy is, that you already know the characters, and even some of the poems that he wrote. It's assuming that you have a working knowledge of the novels and the poems and the literature that he wrote, and you won't get much out of it unless you have read Hardy already. But as someone who's a massive Thomas Hardy fan, I really did get a lot out of it, and I really enjoyed it. If I have one criticism of it, it's that Hardy himself sometimes gets lost because of the overwhelming detail that we are given of all of the various women that he was sometimes only tangentially connected with in his life. But I really enjoyed it, and I hope that anyone who reads this also enjoys it. This was actually published this year, so this is a new release. So go out and get it whilst it's still fresh. That's all I'll say. And lastly, but not least, we have Ronald Hutton's magisterial, definitive, so far 2-volume, but it's shaping up to be a 3-volume, biography of Oliver Cromwell. Perhaps my favourite figure in all of English history. He is just the most fascinating presence, the most captivating individual ever to grace the stage of English history. The only commoner ever to become head of state. The man who went from being a provincial nobody, a complete obscurity, living a backwoods existence in the backwoods, the quarter areas of the country. And he becomes this pioneering, intrepid, daring Civil War general, who then goes on to become the first person in the history of these islands to rule all 3 nations, and I say 3 because at this time Wales was part of England, to rule all 3 nations by the sword. He effectively conquered Scotland and Ireland. And he is just the most fascinating figure, not least because for the first 40 years of his life, we know practically nothing about him. And Ronald Hutton, who is an academic historian by training, he's actually a professor at the University of Bristol, does a brilliant job. I'm overusing the word fascinating, so I'm trying to come up with some new words. He does the most thorough and professional job of piecing together the life of this extraordinary man. He's very good on the early years, which we know very little about. He's very good when it comes to cross-referencing the sources against one another and giving us the most accurate picture of what he was actually getting up to during his youth. We follow him from his youth to his middle age, where he is suddenly catapulted into significance, becomes a member of parliament, becomes a leading figure in the Civil War, becomes a general in the Parliamentarian Army, which later becomes the new Model Army, and his extraordinary meteoric rise just goes on from there. This first volume follows him from his birth to 1646, the end of the First Civil War, and this second volume follows him from 1646 to 1653, by which time he was by far the most powerful man in England. He was the commander-in-chief of the army. He had deposed the parliament that was running the country, the Rump Parliament, and he was the de facto leader of the country. And this book, the second volume, very much leaves us on a cliffhanger. I'm waiting with bated breath for the third volume, which will of course take us up to his death. But what can I say? Hutton is not only absolutely first-rate in terms of his command of the sources, but he is a brilliant writer. He has that skill that is so often lacking in academic historians, of being a compelling writer. He makes Cromwell's life into this really compelling, really readable narrative. And it helps that he also does a really good job of sketching out the physical landscape that Cromwell and his men would have marched across. he does this with a literary aplomb, which you would find ordinarily in a novel, in a historical novel. And he manages to bring this into his history in a way that is really captivating. The only thing that would stop a general reader from really enjoying this magnificent work is that he is very heavy on the source analysis. And as someone who studied history at university and enjoys that sort of stuff, it's no problem for me, but the general reader might find that a bit dull. But I personally think he does it so well, and it's written so magnificently that that's Hardy Women, which just fell on the floor there. I think he does it so well and so magnificently that he can, frankly, be forgiven for that. And I think that he does his source analysis very concisely. He does it very thoroughly, but also in a way that still makes the book thoroughly readable and thoroughly enjoyable. So that's Ronald Hutton's Cromwell biography. The first volume is The Making of Oliver Cromwell. We have the man himself. And then the second volume is Commander-in-Chief. And I'm actually hoping to get a review of this on Open Letters Review, in addition to the one that I've already done. And I've also done one of James Baldwin's No Name in the Street, which will also hopefully be on Open Letters Review at some point in the future. So keep your eyes peeled for that. So without further ado, I think I will leave it there for now. Thank you, BookTube.